Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Return on Wellness. This is season 2, episode 3. I'm David T. Stevens. Thank you for tuning in. We're sitting down with the founder of BizBash, David Adler, today, and we're going to talk about his time covering society events in DC, a little bit about his time in the State Department and all the great things he learned there. There's going to be a lot of practical tips and tricks that you can apply as a planner today. And we're also going to talk about over experiences, which is a really interesting tie-in as to how that impacts wellness, as well as he's going to share some of his info on how he incorporates wellness while he's managing everything in his life. And if you listen all the way to the end, we're even going to talk about his upcoming Broadway play and learning a little more about that. So make sure you listen all the way to the end.
Aloha. Welcome to Return on Wellness, a web series brought to you by Olympian Meeting.
We are in the heart of downtown Austin. You can see the Capitol behind us. That's not a green screen. It's real. A big shout out to my friend Elijah May. Thank you for helping me find this space. Okay, so David, let's just jump into it. I'd love to talk about your background. You have an extensive background in media. I noticed I was perusing your LinkedIn doing my research, stalking, whatever you want to call it. And I saw this extensive background in media, and then it just kind of flipped to events. So I'm kind of curious if you can walk us through how you got there.
Well, I actually have always been involved in events.
Oh, okay.
Only because events are the strategy of how you connect with people. And it's either the best marketing thing you can ever do. I mean, media and events are intrinsically connected. When I was 21, I decided I didn't want to go into my father's advertising agency business. And I started a society magazine for Washington. And so I ended up hiring my mother to be the editor. And
Okay.
I used my father's offices. And I decided, well, this would be fun to sort of go out every night and cover the Washington social scene.
Did you sell ad space to your
I sold
your
ad
dad?
space. No,
his
I didn't.
advertising agency?
Well, his advertising agency actually bought some of the clients were like the big condominium in Washington and a bank, and those were our first advertisers, because the strategy was, how do you reach really wealthy people in 1975? 1975 was kind of the end of the 60s when you think about it. And all of a sudden we went from hippies on the mall to gourmet cookies. And so it was the beginning of the luxury era, and Washington society was kind of ripe for it. And so we decided to focus in on power in Washington, and we focused in on the human side of power. The human side of power was going to events. So at 21, I was out there with, the president of the United States, and ambassadors and diplomats, and going to the Iranian embassy before the Shah fell. And, it was like one big exciting moment to really see people. And the one thing when I talked to politicians and senators and ambassadors, their number one job, they knew how to do events, because a politician's number one skill set is doing events and campaigning.
Right.
And so I talked to them all about events, and we covered events every day in our society magazine. And I learned all about the front end of events, being at the events. And then after my career sort of took me to a different direction, I ended up on the back end of events to figure out how you make them and things like that. But it always has been somewhere around events. In fact, I have 100,000 photographs from the 70s and 80s in Washington that I'm in the process of digitizing right now that cover Washington inside 1 million parties and 1 million events and 1 million inaugurations and 1 million embassies and 1 million things. And I'm turning them into an experience. I'm turning them into a book, and I'm turning it into fine art. My walls in my apartment are filled with huge photographs of people at events in Washington that are the wildest things you've ever seen in your life.
I'm a little speechless. I think one of the things that's circulating in my brain is right now there's been a lot of talk about, there's a lot of events people who say that they struggle with having a seat at the table when it comes to the executive level. And I think it's really fascinating to hear that you spoke to heads of state and presidents and ambassadors, and they all understand the importance of events. But yet business executives are struggling to understand the importance of events.
The smart ones know.
Well,
the smart ones know, because the one thing I learned about, one of the things I did is I I got voluntold to work at the State Department because my friend became the chief of protocol of the United States. And so I worked for Hillary, basically as a voluntold for the whole administration of Barack Obama. And I learned from Hillary the concept of soft power. Soft power is what we do.
Yeah.
We are about soft power, and hard power plus soft power equals smart power. And smart CEOs. When I was working in the corporate world, I spent hours with the CEOs of my company doing the seating plans because it was all strategic. Who gets to sit next to whom? And what are you going to talk about? And the smart CEOs are amazing event organizers.
Okay. This is going to be a
fascinating. Benioff from
conversation.
Salesforce is unbelievable.
Benioff gets it.
Benioff gets it. Hillary got it. Hillary was unbelievable at event organizing. Bill Clinton, all the politicians get it.
Yeah.
And a lot of the CEOs, anyone that runs an association gets it because they have to understand it. And sooner or later, the corporation guys get it. But it takes them time to get it. It's like that first initial event designer that is that's basically the assistant to the person that gets a job, and they've been to a wedding, so they make their first event all about flowers, and then they never do flowers again in a way that's intensely floral.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
we're gonna deviate here because I love where this has gone so quickly, and then we're gonna come back. But I would love to if you had a piece of advice for someone who is struggling to get their CEO to understand why they should be conversing with each other. Let's say it's someone who sits in marketing, who reports to a VP of marketing or a CMO, and that CEO just doesn't get it. Like he's like, oh, just put a credit card down and throw a happy hour, which obviously we both know is not, there's zero soft power there. It's like, well, let's see who shows up. What kind of things would you say to help try to get that seat at the table?
That's a really good question, and I'm struggling with an answer to that because a lot of it happens with the relationship between you and your CEO or your C-suite friends.
So how do you, let's start with this, and how would you initiate trying to develop that?
I would say try to break bread. Try to go to meal with him. Try not to just make it a meeting, and try to bring the if you can create a luncheon situation for your C-suite that you bring people in and you can sort of show that you are a great connector of people, then they'll respect you more. And you're running when you're doing events in a company, you're running the underground network. And so you have to develop those relationships. You just can't take orders. You have to talk back a little bit. You have to say, this is the way that we should do it. When you're really young, it's hard to get those people to think about that.
Right.
So you may want to do it with your colleagues, but I do these Jeffersonian style dinner parties all the time, which I've learned are really good. And I bring people in, and you can do this with your executive team, but you don't start talking business. You talk about things that democratize that room. So the question that I use, even if the most important people in the world, is I can try to take control of the dinner party and do questions like, what was your first job and what did you learn from it? And it turns out that even if you're the CEO of the biggest company in the world and your first job was at Baskin Robbins scooping ice cream, you learn something from that you never forget.
Right.
And what happens is when people start opening up, they start mirroring each other, and it gets deeper and deeper and deeper. Every time I've done this, somebody cries because that reminds them of when they worked in a facility for Alzheimer's, for example, and they connected to people in different ways, or they milk cows for their family ranch or whatever. And it makes you get to know someone, and it makes you emotionally connect. So if you can, I think the first thing is you have to emotionally connect. You can't just say, okay, we got to do this and use soft power, blah, blah, blah. It has to be you have to create a relationship. I think that we all know that the whole business is about relationships.
Yes, I totally agree.
So the relationship with your boss and your C-suite people and your division heads, you're going to find someone there that buys in because everyone is an event organizer.
Yeah.
Everyone has done this before.
Yep.
And so you just have to bring it down to how they relate to it. They've all done a wedding. While it's terrible to say the event organizers all think that they know everything, the good news is they think they know everything. So that you can have a conversation with them and you can evolve them.
Yeah, yeah. Would you say it would be too auspicious or bold to just try to schedule a lunch with your CEO to get to know them?
Oh no, I think you want to do it in the form of an interview with them. What do you like about how you do your entertaining? I mean,
Yeah.
everybody does that. The social secretaries of the White House. You need to know how Mrs. Biden, Dr. Biden, what she likes and what she doesn't like. You need to know what Michelle Obama likes and what she doesn't like. And every time that I've seen an event organizer go in, like Brian Raffinelli goes in and talks to Michelle Obama, and they bond forever because they understand the types of things that she likes and what she doesn't like. Like I found out through interviewing Disha Dyer that, Barack Obama loves bacon bars and that he wanted to have at his closing event a bacon bar. It's like these are,
It sounds good to me.
Basically what happens is events become toys and remembrances, and remember that first birthday party. So it all comes down to your history.
Yeah.
So
well, it humanizes.
it humanizes
people, right?
That's the whole purpose of it.
And there's a lot of people. There's some executives who have egos who don't want to be treated like humans, but there's a lot of them that love the idea of being treated like a human and being asked personal questions where they get to talk about it.
Yeah, you start with a division.
Right.
When you're in a big company, you start with a division. You start with a guy that you can connect with. And
Probably head of sales.
Head of
let's say.
sales.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they understand.
Right. They
Head of
definitely
sales,
understand.
They understand. And then why not make it a little interesting? Why make it, you want to connect, you want to create, they're in the business of creating relationships.
Yep.
And why don't you connect it? Like we did, we did an event where we made people enter from the point of view of, do they like salty food or sugary or sweet food? And we had two different entrances. So it's the innovation,
right,
is also part of this. And they want to you got to brainstorm with them. You
Yeah.
make it their idea, and then you have to sort of bring
Right.
it in and tear it.
Yeah. You help them figure out what their best idea
Right.
is.
And it's all part of wellness.
Yeah.
Because what happens is, I don't believe that we're in the event business. We're in the goosebump business. And that when you have a conversation, like we're having a conversation right now, we're connecting.
Right.
And if you connect with your boss, it's no different than connecting at an event or connecting on at scale when you do a good presentation. I mean, it's all about and wellness. I think, I'm sure you know more about this topic than I, but when you have that feeling, it energizes everything in your body.
I totally agree.
Even a good meditation gives you goosebumps.
Yeah. The experience.
Yeah.
Right. And there's an upcoming speaking engagement I'm doing, and wellness wasn't an option when they asked me to fill stuff out. And so I checked attendee experience, because I think that's where this all really boils down to. Okay, we're going to go back a little bit.
Okay.
I love where this went, though. I think if you didn't get anything from the first 10 minutes of this, then there's no help for you. How did you transcend from the front end of events to the back end of events? Was that an intentional thing?
Yes.
Did it happen?
Yes.
Okay.
I sold Dossier, Washington Dossier, after attending events like 10 times a night, going out in black tie and everything. And as I mentioned, my life was like, if I did my autobiography, then it would have been life at the other end of a toothpick.
Right.
And I got kind of sick of it. And so I needed a break. And I thought, well, I do love the event side. And I ended up being head of corporate communications for a company called Prime Media. And we owned 350 magazines. And my job was to create experiences that sold advertising and had consumers buy subscriptions. And we owned New York Magazine and Soap Opera Digest and Channel One, which is TV in the classrooms. We owned.
I remember Channel One.
Yes, that's where Anderson Cooper came from, and Lisa Ling and all that. And so we did all these events for them. So I really had to. I was spending millions and millions of dollars on events, and all I would do is call my friends and say, who do you know that can do events? And I found this guy, Robert Isabel, who was in Washington, who was in New York City when I worked for Prime Media. And I'd spend on for example, 17 magazine, we had the 50th anniversary, and I would spend $100,000 on each palm tree that was in the room. And so I had to negotiate, I don't need that many palm trees. Can I do 4 instead of 5? And he called me cheap. But his design was amazing, because he did Tina Brown's events, he did our events. And there was this thing where you had to create these experiences to get people to want to live the persona of the magazine. So the first experiences were about a magazine's coming to life. And, when I went to magazine school, the first thing that they make you do is write the personality profile of your magazine. And if your magazine was doing events, what kind of events would they do? And that was the first experiences. And then magazines became kind of the place where you would bring your brands to life. And then all of a sudden people discovered, oh, I can do my brand events on my own. And so marketing became the most important thing after the dawn of the iPhone, when you were not talking just to the person in the room, but you were talking to them and 30 of their friends.
Right.
So the iPhone blew up the event industry and made it into the experience world that we know, because the budgets were bigger because you were talking to more people. And so the agencies sort of blew it up. And so that's how I transitioned into not just events in the back end of the front end, but it all works together. So I think I'm still in the front end of events. I still am in the back end of events.
Yeah, I think if anything, excuse me, you're almost above events. Right. Looking at them from a macro level, so that you can see the beginning, the middle, the end, etc.
Well, because it's all about my mission is how do you propel society to connect in better ways? And sometimes you use events, and sometimes you use other tools and strategies. Right. Because there's a great book out called Social Physics: How Ideas Flow. And ideas flow the same way viruses flow. We learned that from the pandemic. Yep. In fact, there's companies that can track how an idea at a trade show travels around the country, like solar power. You go to a solar power trade show, all of a sudden it's big in Austin, and then they do it in another place, and all of a sudden solar power is big in another place.
I can tell you from buying a home that had solar on it, it's not big in Austin, but
it
should be.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So
when you started BizBash, what was the real intention? What was this is what this I almost want to say, what was the brand identity for it? Since we talked about that, right?
Because at Prime Media, I was spending millions of dollars on events, and I wanted to help people try to find vendors. And so I wanted to allow people to peek over the fence to see what other people are doing, so that they can get ideas and then find the vendors who can do it. So we started out only online. We go to an event and we just figured out who all the vendors were at the event. And we made a list. And in our magazine, we would just have a list of vendors, and in our websites, and they would become heroes because they were involved in the VMAs. And so people wanted to use the caterer from the VMA, and then they wanted to use the lighting guy from the VMA, and we'd have a list of all of the vendors. And it made it easier. We disintermediated the event organizer who had their Rolodex secret. Secret Rolodex.
Well, that was the power, right?
That was the power. And then we got rid of it. Now you had to be a good event professional, because we unveiled who did what at their events. They didn't like us in the beginning. And then all of a sudden we started in New York, and we owned New York. We basically, it was like we became a love brand in New York, and we focused on New York for 5 years, did nothing but New York. And then we expanded to Toronto and to Miami and to Chicago and to LA. And we tried to stay only in the major markets in the early days. And because we wanted to really create those communities, because each event community is its own thing.
Yeah.
And it's a very local business when you think about it, because the vendors are pretty local. So we tried to create heroes in each business, and we turned the event organizer into our stars. Because I understood media.
Right.
We wanted to celebritize them, and we wanted to show that they weren't just in the back end, but they were heroes. And by doing our lists of the top 100 events in New York and the top 100 events in Chicago and DC, it all of a sudden put them on a platform. Yeah. And when 2007 came and the iPhone turned events into marketing, the event agencies got more involved in it, and they saw who the people were that were doing the work. So the whole idea was peek over the fence to see what other people are doing, and it'll get better. Because Washington, when I grew up in Washington, it was the taste level was pretty low.
Yeah.
But as soon as we started covering events and people saw, oh, I can do that, all of a sudden the competition raised the bar.
Yeah.
And then different cities were different ways. New York was a little pedestrian too. And they saw what LA was doing, and they wanted to say, oh, I can do that. And then, South by Southwest saw what other people were doing. So it became an idea fest.
Yes.
And we started doing our trade shows. Our trade shows happened because the Javits Center wanted to do something with customers. So the first 3 years of our trade shows were free to us. And they gave us the trade show. I hadn't had to spend more than like the cost of stamps on doing an event, because everybody wanted to showcase what they do. And we got the craziest stuff ever. And it became we became a love brand because of that. And then we started focusing on the people that did the work. And then we never promoted events of vendors. We always promoted events of the corporate planners and the bigger associations, because it all went downhill.
Right.
So we only focused on the top level decision makers, so that they would then, it didn't matter. We wouldn't go to a showcase event from a local vendor, because it didn't matter. We don't see the vendor in action was the name of the game. And we criticize some events too.
So that's a perfect segue. I think there's something that I've noticed when people get the opportunity to promote themselves. It seems like sometimes they phone it in. I go back to my days when I was in radio, and a car dealership would give away a car. They would spend the money of buying the car, right? They would spend the money of all the airtime. We would give them a ton of free airtime. And then when the winner gets the car, it's this like stripped down base model crank window. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, this is an opportunity to showcase your brand, and you're putting the least viable product out there. How was it critiquing events when it came to when somebody didn't put their best foot forward? What kind of...
The worst thing to do is we didn't write it. We just didn't do it when it was really bad.
So you just leave it out.
We would leave it out. But other times we would actually say, the air conditioning didn't work. And people they were sweating to death at this event. And some of my best relationships were the ones that we killed, because they appreciated at the end that we were telling the truth. And I think that there's a problem with media today, that there's no church and state, because a lot of it's pay for play. And what we did is we actually were honest that this thing didn't work. It was too many people. It was too hot. It was a shit show. And this was just not a right thing to do. And so they were mad. They'd call, and I'd have people call me. I'd have union guys call me and say, we're going to put you in cement shoes by the river, that type of thing, because we would criticize an event or something. But it's trust that you build.
Yeah.
But with your reader, because ultimately it's the reader that is the ultimate. In our case, it was the decision maker at the top level corporations and agencies that read us and believed us.
Yeah.
Because trust, you can't take away. You can lose it easily. Yes. But you can build it, but only if you're really honest.
Yeah.
And I've always done that. Even in my Society magazine in Washington, we would say, this was not right. This was not good. Okay,
yeah. I jokingly, do you remember Joan Rivers had a show called Fashion Police?
Yes, of course.
I jokingly told some friends of mine, I said, we should do an event police where we go to the big conferences, Dreamforce, Oracle Open World, those big ones, and go to all the parties and then do an event police debrief afterwards. And they're like, yeah, that's the quickest way to not want anyone to ever talk to you in the entire business.
Yeah. That's
and I'm
true,
like,
that's true.
Yeah, but why is that? Well, we should, especially with industry association events, sometimes it's some of the worst food I've ever experienced.
Yeah.
And but it sounds like that.
Well, we did it through showcasing the best of and ignoring the worst of. If we went to your event and didn't cover it, you were in big trouble.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So it was a bit of omission.
There was we did a lot of omission because we didn't want to hurt people either. We don't want to we're not 60 Minutes,
right?
At the same time, if this really tasted bad. But it's also interesting. Events got better after the iPhone was released because of the visualization, because of the photos. It was like police photos. The police are a little better because they have police cams now.
Right.
People were doing crazy crap, before, because they can get away with it. And then when you had visuals and, you saw your pictures when Instagram came out and things like that,
right.
You did not want to show that the equipment was all fouled up with the food and the everything looked terrible.
Fair enough.
So, but I think that was the hallmark of the change, because also we did a survey right before the iPhone came out on how guests behave, and guests before iPhone were getting drunk. They were stealing food. they were hitting on everybody. And as soon as cameras became the thing at events, people behaved a little better. Or they behaved badly because of the picture. I mean, it's sort of like they were hammier because of that, but they weren't as mean-spirited because they were being photographed.
Well, now thanks to TikTok, there's people who have made careers out of being idiots.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a Super Bowl. I worked Super Bowl, I think it was 50 in San Francisco. And we had some people at a VIP event dismantle and try to steal a table. It was this hammered copper top table, and they're walking towards the exit. And I see this one guy with this really bad limp, and he's holding his leg. And so I went over to him to ask him if he was okay. And then I could see this leg sticking out of his pants. And the person behind him was like this. And I was like, wait, what is happening here? And they had taken apart this cocktail table and were trying to smuggle it out. So people still behave like idiots.
Yeah, people do, yeah. They get caught now.
I think
a little more.
I'm wondering if when the iPhone came out, is that when you saw people start talking about experiences, or did that happen before?
No. Well, the magazine world was always about experiences because magazines were all about bringing the culture of the magazine to life. So you always had, like, we had at 17 Magazine's 50th anniversary. This was before all the internet came out. Everything was, we had these meetings about how do you create the experience of a 17-year-old girl. And so it was all Barbie type of stuff. Not Barbie, but it was equivalent to what happened with Barbie at those. And for the Daily Racing Forum, we had events that felt like going to the race. For New York Magazine, we did it at Studio 54, our event. So those experiences. But after the internet came out, the budgets became bigger. After not the internet, but the iPhone came out, the budgets came bigger because the experience agencies started developing. And it was not for the person in the room anymore. It was for everybody.
Right.
And that changed everything. And now also from a media point of view, everyone became a media company. Every individual person became a media company. And so it changed everything. And it's interesting to watch the evolution of this. I mean, food is now marketing. Right. If you look at food, the logos on the ice, and where else do you have, you talk about the last mile. This is the last inch. So you can put, somebody's brand in their face and they can eat it. It's kind of, when you think about it, it all has to be integrated in order to be an experience.
Yeah, I completely agree. I first experienced Experiential in, I want to say it was 2005 when I worked for my first experiential agency.
That was early days.
Yeah, which is crazy because I don't understand why it's taken so long for corporate America to get on board with what experiential was back in the day, but it has. So I think where this is going in my brain is to talk about what have you seen differentiate a trend from something that becomes an actual change? Because I think there are some trends that are flash in the pan. And there are other trends that really genuinely change things.
There were a lot of trends about bad technology that was just before their time. Like during the early 2000s, there was a big photography, digital photography thing that was happening, but it wasn't ready yet. Everything was too slow. So those things took a long time to evolve into something. In terms of permanent change, I think people didn't recognize. When I talk about the soft power idea, they didn't recognize the importance of what we do, the importance of soft power and creating relationships. And that's what is the big change, that people now realize that it's important to connect people in ways that are emotional, and that the wellness piece is also good and they feel good about it. And I think that's the biggest change, is that the recognition that this is important. It actually happened during the pandemic. Event organizers became the go-to people by the C-suite because they realized that the event people in the big companies were the ones that knew the customers, that knew the employees, and knew everything. And so they were the ones behind the scenes of what the hell do we do now? The CEOs and the C-suite people reached out to them. So they became more important than ever. to get that seat at the table. And I think that's a huge change. Appreciation. Also, I think businesses now think more like event organizers think, in terms of we call this concept keeping the paint wet, because they can't you can't script it to the point if you can't read the room.
Right.
What event organizers are good at are reading the room and seeing, okay, this is not working in real time. And how do you shift it, as opposed to a scripted TV show where it's all completely scripted? You have to know how to pivot. And so
It's
now,
improv.
yeah, it's improv. And now CEOs, because of the pandemic, C-suite, they can't just take the plan and do the plan. They have to evolve it fast.
Yeah.
And so I think that's sort of the metaphor for events is, when do you start the program because you see people are losing interest, or when do you see people go looking at their phones and then jump in, or when do you pull the plug on somebody? You have to. So event thinking and corporate thinking are becoming more flexible.
I like that. And I think to tie that back with the trends, I think something I'm taking away, and please correct me if I'm drawing an improper conclusion here, but as trends come out, you have to think about if they're going to stick around or not. Are they connecting people? Are they bringing people together? Are they evoking emotions? Are they creating memories? Those are the trends. Sure, there might be a new piece of tech, or there might be different types of venues, or a new fruit cocktail, or I don't know,
Right.
whatever.
Right. Yeah.
There's those trends that come and go.
The cotton candy trends.
Yes.
I call it the cotton candy trends.
Perfect.
That like they just melt in your mouth and you're gone.
Right. Versus the ones that are lasting change in the industry.
Yeah. Lasting change of the industry is, you're seeing a lot more strategy, and you're seeing a lot more platform events that you don't do one-off events anymore. You may change strategy is different than creative, but a platform is what people are looking for. These, Cater Source, I'm here today for Cater Source. That's a platform that happens every year for years and years and years.
Right.
And how do you put events underneath that platform to sort of serve the needs of your different niche audiences? And how do you get more personalization? And I think personalization is a trend that is going to be here forever. I mean, making that event feel like you. The other thing that, in terms of trends, is a little jumping back, is I just interviewed this guy, David Adler, who wrote a book called The End of Demographics.
He's my last episode.
Yeah,
I just sat down with him.
He is fantastic.
Yes.
And it was one of the things that when he talked about belonging, that it was event organizers are making the mistake of focusing too much on experience and not enough on belonging and networking and making feel people connected to things. And I think that's the future of how events have to be more important.
Yeah.
I
would agree. And yes, David's fantastic. I think I'm glad to see the traction he's really starting to get. Yeah. I met him a few years ago.
Yeah.
And it just made sense to me.
Yeah.
So I was very happy to sit down with him.
I think I did see that you did that. But when did it come out?
It comes out. It
hasn't come out yet.
It's not out yet.
Oh, okay. Well, I can't wait.
I put out a couple snippets.
That's where I saw it.
So with that, that's one of the reasons that I think wellness is one of the things that isn't necessarily just a flash in the pan trend. I think it's one of the things that actually is going to stick around for a long time, because it's highly personalized and it brings people together, because people who want to experience wellness in different ways are going to meet people that they may not have ever met. But I'm curious what you have seen in the space, or what you're hearing, or what your kind of
about
thoughts are.
Wellness. Or
yeah.
about,
Well, I'll tell you. Let's say group wellness.
Well, I'll tell you what. There's group wellness. When I was voluntold to work at the State Department, I did this thing to help raise money for the 8th floor of the State Department as a museum, and so we could do anything we want. So we decided, why don't we have a conversation between Hillary Clinton and Henry Kissinger? So we did that, and we did it we did it as a way to help raise money for this 8th floor project. And Henry Kissinger at this event gets on the stage and talks to Hillary and says, Hillary, you're the Secretary of State. Every day you're drinking from a fire hose, and all you're doing is spending your intellectual capital. You need to build your intellectual capital by going to academic settings, by teaching and learning and going to conferences. And I found that the purpose of going to events is to build your intellectual capital. Not only your intellectual capital, but your social capital, so that you can spend it when you're drinking from the fire hose and that you don't have the time. So wellness, the ultimate wellness, is building your intellectual capital as well as your body and your general wellness. But that to me is the most stimulating part of wellness, is learning.
Yeah.
And I think that events right now are doing a terrible job on education and learning, and they need to up the game. Because if you don't go and get that intellectual capital hit, you're wasting your time in many cases. It's not just networking, meeting people, and trying to hustle.
Right.
It's about building that intellectual capital. And that's what so it made sense. Every time when I heard Henry Kissinger say that to Hillary, I said, you're right. This woman is so busy. All she's doing is taking what she learned and it is going out the fire hose. And I thought that was hugely part of the wellness trend that needs to become more important than ever.
So let's dig into that if you're up for it. What do we need to change? What do we need to improve? What can we get better at?
Education in events and speakers in events are becoming boring. They're becoming hackneyed. They're unnecessary in the age of AI. You can't have an hour conversation with anybody. People do not have the attention spans for that. And also it becomes mush after a while. So I think that you have to treat education at events like journalism, that somebody has to research what that topic is about, do an intro like they do in 60 Minutes in terms of what this is about, and then have the conversation on the controversies, so that you don't have everyone agreeing with each other, but it's much more thought out. And using the skills of everything in AI and video and all the different multiple senses in order to do that. And I think that that's, especially for keynotes, that to have 7 CEOs get up and talk about the same thing is the most boring thing. If an hour is a killer, right? I mean, when you go, we're not set up for an hour attention spans anymore, unless you want to dig in it and it's so well thought out that you're getting pearls and goosebumps coming from whatever you're hearing.
Yeah. Well, the irony of this episode being over an hour long is not lost on me.
But the thing is though, no, in podcasting, it actually makes sense. Because podcasting is that conversation with a person that you want to be in that long-term conversation.
Yeah.
Long form works if you are not just filling time.
So the great Liz Lathan always calls it sit and get when it comes to keynotes, or what I used to position it as internally at corporate was I would ask people what format do they want the event to be, especially when it came to digital events. Don't get me started on the term virtual. I have a problem with it. But when I would ask people, okay, do you want it to be a lecture or do you want it to be a conversation? Well, I want it to be a webinar. Okay, well, we don't do webinars anymore. So do you want it to be a lecture or a conversation? Oh, well, a lecture sounds terrible. You're right, it does. And everybody knows that now because everyone's attention span shrunk. So I think what you're declaring on this episode is that the hour-long keynote lecture, unless it's really good.
Unless it's really good. This is Barack Obama.
Dead.
Yeah.
Okay, rip the keynote. Well, the long, boring one at least, unless it's someone way outside the...
Yeah.
I think so often people just think that if they spend a bunch of money, they're going to get that.
I mean, storytelling, still big.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't go wrong with, but storytelling that relates to what you do. Like a lot of people are hiring it's great to get an inspirational speaker, but you can tell it's so canned.
Right.
Jason Alexander used to do this thing where he'd do the mock inspirational speaker at events. I thought that was really funny. And it just, it was a parody, but it really wasn't.
Yeah.
What happens when you go to an event and you sort of see, okay, the keynote's going to talk for an hour. You never heard of him before. And he's going to talk about his adventure. It'll be great. But I got to be blown away if I'm going to sit here for an hour, or I'm going to be, fidgeting and like figuring out how to get out of here.
So I really want this to be helpful to planners. So I'm going to put you on the spot here because you like the hard hitting journalistic style questions. What kind of advice or what kind of verbiage would you use, or maybe even science or data, for a planner that needs to tell their executive nobody wants to hear you for an hour. And that's not in those words, obviously, but how do you position that in a way that's effective? And because I was fortunate, I got to work for one that did understand that. Like when we came back from the pandemic, I said, you get 30 minutes. He goes, well, what do you mean I get 30 minutes? I used to get an hour. And I'm like, yeah, nobody's got the attention span for that anymore. And he was like, oh, okay.
You know what you do?
I was fortunate, though.
You get the allies of his children because they will tell them the truth. And I think you just be straight up. You're making a huge mistake. You got to go for it. You got to go for it. You can't, and you have to show that you could have the impact of 2 hours if you do this right. Because if you use video and different media types, that, I'm using invideo.oa to create videos that have better intros of the topic than you can ever get from a CEO talking. And the idea of building him up and then letting him talk will make him feel more important. I mean, there's just techniques now, I think, that you can do to get the message across and get the storytelling across and don't lecture people. But I mean, all the CEOs are all different. I mean, my CEO at Prime Media was, Mr. Optimism. And, he would always listen to other people's stories and make it interactive and things like that. So I think there are techniques, if you have an hour, to make it not feel like an hour.
I agree. I think some people just think that they're important and they need to be.
Just tell them nobody listens to this anymore. You're happy that you want to reduce. The best thing is your stock will go down if you don't. if you do an hour of keynote.
Well, I think that's an important thing. And I think that actually draws a really important line between people who are party planners. I'm going to use that term loosely because I made a meme this last week about it, versus event professionals.
Yeah.
And professionals keep the objective of the event in mind at all times. And when an executive makes a decision, even if they don't have a chair at the table or a seat at the table, they will drag a chair over to the table and sit down and say, we need to do this in order to succeed.
I'm going to correct you, though. Okay. You said an event, the objective of the event. It's not the objective of the event. It's the objective of the organization. And it's, basically the way I view, when I had the job of head of corporate communications at both Prime Media and Macmillan, and I came up with my Washington experience, I didn't view myself as the VP of corporate communications. I viewed myself as the campaign manager of the organization, because that is what we're doing. Each event is a campaign event on it's like a political event, but it's for your organization. Your organization is an entity, and everything has to fit into the right strategy. And so you may do a sit down. It may not, so you have to use the right strategy. I think creativity and strategy are two different things.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
People have to, in our business, don't know necessarily the difference. And you have to explain it over and over again. The strategy has got to come first. The strategy has to come with lots of research. I would say if you went to your CEO and you did, here is a survey I did of all of our employees about what your speech was, and that's a pretty telling thing. They understand data.
Yeah.
And I think that you don't back it up just with, well, I think that this is such and such. But if you have some data, then, and it's not hard to get data. The best things, when I ever did data stuff, I didn't actually use the data. I used qualitative data. And I interviewed people and I said, what do you think of the CEO's speech? And I put it on video, and then I showed the CEO. And they say, oh my God, I really sucked, didn't I? And that's, you're not saying it to them.
Right.
Their employees are saying it. So that may be another, as we brainstorm around here at this table.
That's their children.
Yeah.
Right.
That's their children.
Sort of
they will change their attitudes in a minute if they saw somebody saying, this guy sucks.
Yeah. Well, that's what we leveraged the survey results from the digital format. And how people reacted to it, because our survey results went way up.
Yeah.
Because the sessions were so short. They're like, love the short session, love the short session. So when we were going back in person, everyone's like, okay, well, I need an hour. And I'm like, no, you don't, because you did it in this much time last year.
Yeah.
And these were the responses. People loved it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why would you go back to that?
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is I had this big thing about social listening. We do this social listening. We go through our social media and we find out all the things about it. No one does social listening live at events. So we need to have better social listening at the event itself. And so we need to do more living audio, video, interviewing, surveys, whatever that people on at the moment. Because people, when they get home, they don't want to fill out these stupid surveys for the most part. And you only get the people that complain. Them. Yeah, you have to bribe, you give them a free whatever.
We hid the event photos from people unless they filled out the survey.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And we got 85% filled out the survey. But I agree.
You got to consciously do it.
I think you also need allies that aren't in the events team, because I think inherently something's got to be really bad that someone will come to you or to someone on your team and say, this is terrible.
Right.
Or otherwise they're all going to be like, oh, this is so great. This is so great. And you don't hear the murmurings.
Right.
So you need allies across the organization so that your regional sales directors or things of that nature, because they're going to get the feedback from their team that's like, oh, this sucked, or this was terrible, or this was awesome. I think probably one of the best survey anecdotally I've gotten results on site was I was standing next to a client and the CEO walked up and he gave his typical, oh, everything's great, blah, blah, blah. And then his wife leaned in and said, we go to a lot of these. This is the best one I've ever been to. And then she was very, very happy client.
Yeah. But the ROI, a lot of times in the old days, it's that CEO saying, oh, this is a really great event. And it sucked, but they think it was good because someone sucked up to them.
Right.
So it's a different, so you have to make sure you get the real feedback for these things.
Like David talked about was survey bias.
Yeah.
When you ask people too direct of a question, they'll lie.
Yeah.
So I'm with you.
No, totally.
We're going to dig in a little bit about wellness, and I wanted to ask you some things about, you've run large organizations. I'm sure you've experienced your highs and lows of stress. I'm sure you've had to set some boundaries at some point. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what you do to take care of yourself. And then I think one of the things that is lacking in the events, in the planner world and in the planner mindset, is that they can set boundaries. So if you have any thoughts?
It's hard. I mean, when you're on the road a lot, all your things that you plan sort of fall apart. So how do you keep going?
Yeah.
And I'm a big believer. I'm doing virtual training 3 days a week with my trainer at Equinox, everywhere I am in the world. And I think I've been to every Equinox in Palo Alto and Austin and Washington and New York. And when I do it with my trainer, he knows how to count to 12 and I can only count to 8. So it's not it's not really about the expertise. It's about the commitment. And I think wellness is a lot about the commitment.
And it's a commitment to yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's hard. You're going to easily break your own commitments. But if you have something on the books that you have to do, it's a lot harder.
Accountability is a big thing for you.
Accountability is a big thing for me. Thinking about food, I've always had, weight issues. So I've always been like, go to a party and I think, oh my God, I can eat anything I want. And I got to be careful not to. Drinking, I try not to drink too much at these events. Sometimes when I host my own events, I don't drink. I just drink water and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I rarely eat, I try to be careful about that. I try not to stay out too late. I try to not be the last person at the party, at the event.
Usually the drinking and being the last person at the party coincides.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I do this thing also with a little bit back to the other thing when I was at the head of corporate communications. I do this thing with my boss where he was the CEO of the company. We called it Check the Foxholes. And we went to the event 2 hours early and we just looked at everything. We made some changes at the end, but he was bought in that way. Rather than him coming in at 6 o'clock and can't do anything, we wanted to check the foxholes. We called it that. And that was a wellness thing for me because it lowered the stress level. And you didn't have to have the moment when the person, when everything happens at the same time and all the things are going on. And then you're sort of more anticipatory of your boss coming in and then scared shitless that, oh my God, what's going on?
Yeah.
And,
I invited my old CMO to a pre-con.
Yeah.
Just to, I asked her, I said, have you ever been to a pre-con before? And she said, what's a pre-con? I said, oh, you should definitely come.
Yeah.
And I blocked 90 minutes on her calendar. And she was like, what is this thing? And it's 90 minutes. I'm like, we're just going to go over the program. I just want you to feel good about things, blah, blah, blah. And she experienced a pre-con for the first time and it blew her mind.
And makes them feel more comfortable too.
Yes, but then there was that connection there. But I love the idea of even potentially inviting your CEO to come in early and say, let's walk the room, let's check things out, let's
Yeah.
make sure that, and that can be whoever your championing executive is.
Because your anxiety wellness is more important than anything too. Because the anxiety, I mean, you know, the number one survey result I used to hear about was that most people are fearful that no one's going to show up at their events, even at the White House. Their fear that no one's going to come. And it may not be real, but it's an anxiety in your own head that, you know, you're, all of those devils in your brain
Right.
that say, I'm not good enough to do this. And, oh my God, did I make the right decision? I mean, that's very taxing on your body and everything.
Well, I will say the most stressful event I ever planned was my own wedding.
Oh,
because I had, and or like the first event I do at a company, right? Nobody knows who you are.
Totally.
They're like, who is this clown?
Totally.
Let's see what they do.
So Scott Galloway, who is part of this Pivot podcast with Kara Swisher, who I listened to that podcast. Literally, I've listened to Kara Swisher maybe 40 hours in a week once. I mean, because I've listened to everything she does. And so Scott Galloway says, they were doing their conference in Florida. And he says, this event planning thing is very stressful. And he says, do you know the biggest thing about events is that if you don't get it right, it's public failure. And people are more afraid of public failure than anything. You can be an investor, lose millions of dollars in something and no one knows it. And that's okay. But public failure is the hardest thing. It's also, you get the biggest bang for your buck too. It's the highest risk. That's what an entrepreneur does. But, being an event organizer is being an entrepreneur every day and being basically failing, 30% of the time, no matter what, because you can't control everything.
Yeah.
But it's public failure. And that's what people are more afraid of than anything else.
Well, you were putting your decision-making skills on display.
It's the hardest thing ever.
To not only be seen, but to be openly judged.
Yes. It's like, do you want to torture yourself? This is torture, when you think about it. But it is, though, when you do it well, the rewards are great.
That's massive.
And you have more visibility in your company than anyone else.
Yeah.
And you're running the Underground Railroad and the regular railroad, and you're running everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree.
And you also connect to the company in more ways than anybody can. You have your touch points everywhere.
So have you ever experienced what you would call some form of burnout?
Oh, yes, of course. Exhaustion does that too. I think at the end of, I've been to 5,785 events. I added up how many events I've been to. I don't know if it's exactly correct, but
it sounded very impressive.
Sometimes, well, I just turned 70, believe it or not.
Happy birthday.
And it was, and so I added up. I said, how many, because I like going out. I get goosebumps when I go out and I talk to people. I like talking to people. And I've learned a lot from it, but you have to sort of take some time and don't do anything too. I mean, and, chill out. I do go to this place called Rancho La Puerta, which is a spa in Tecate, Mexico, that I've been going to for 40 years. And it's a mountain climbing and hiking and yoga and all that stuff. And it's a great break. And a couple weeks a year, you completely chill, but it's going to events because every day there's another event at the thing.
Right.
You're having lectures on different things, and it's building that intellectual capital.
Yeah. So I think the real takeaway for planners here is that it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to take time off. When you aren't doing that, you're doing everyone around you a disservice.
Yes. And also letting go. The one thing I had a problem doing early on is letting other people be in charge. I love not being in charge. And when I left the corporate communications role at Primedia, and I had a guy by the name of Richard Aaron who worked for me. I let him run all my events, and he just called in, and I just showed up, and it was great. It was fantastic. And then I had another vice president, Nicole Peck. I just let them do it. And I just would go, I wouldn't even go to the event until I trusted them so much. I just showed up. And I got to that point, and that to me was the best. And I was able to objectively judge what was going on and be their cheerleaders. And especially when we got to sort of the Instagram moments, things at events where it became more interesting to see the event. But trusting your people is the ultimate wellness.
Yeah, I think it's the ultimate self-care.
It's ultimate self-care.
That's why hiring the right people we talk about what control freaks we are, but that extends, let's say, for a single planner at a tech company, which I've been before. That's why I never called them vendors. I always called them partners.
Yeah, well, they're your team.
Yeah.
I mean, you're basically creating a virtual team that comes in and has to support you, and you have to be able to complete each other's words
100%.
and sentences.
Yeah, because everyone that when I interviewed the CMO of Splash last year, the event tech company, and she's a former D1 athlete, and we were talking about the fact that events are really, they're a team sport.
Totally, it's a total team sport.
Everybody shows
it's public failure for the whole team.
It's yes,
if you don't get it right.
Right, and it's like the Super Bowl was on just not too long ago, and when a key player fumbles, it hurts everybody, and everybody knows it. There was I can't remember who it was now, but somebody fumbled, and they were talking about they saw that person on the sideline apologizing to all their teammates because they knew that they blew it.
Yeah.
And I think that's no different than if a caterer blows something or someone on the AV team or whatever. If a mistake happens, everybody has to pick up that slack, and that person who had the misstep needs to.
On a very serious note, I think one of the things that our industry is not doing well is converting our people into first responders if there's an incident. We don't know. I mean, anybody that's on a headset needs to know how to use a defibrillator, in my opinion. And we don't have that kind of training. Because especially with all this new security, people can't get in and out of things as well.
Right.
And with these shootings and things like that, every event is a risk management nightmare. And if you can be the greatest event assistant that you want, and you have headphones and you're doing check-in, but you also need to be a first responder. And we saw that, I think, in the pandemic, how important that is. And we see that because you're in these closed environments, that if the worst happens, can your team mobilize for that too? And we're not good at this. Some people are really good at the safety checks and all of that, but most people are not taking it that seriously.
I had a team at one point there where, and actually when I worked back in radio, this is where I learned it. Our head of the department, every year we all got first aid and CPR certified because, one, because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But two, if some shit goes down and your team is the one to respond, there's tremendous PR opportunity there, which sounds terrible, I know. But they're like, look, there's no downside.
Yeah.
You help someone, you do the right thing, and you get rewarded because your face and your brand, when you're there in your stupid radio station t-shirt doing chest compressions on someone.
It's the ultimate wellness.
It'll be all over the news.
Yeah, because you're helping people. I mean, that's
because you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, you're doing the right thing.
Yeah,
I think I think it's something we have to work on. Is we take it for granted everything's gonna be okay, and we can't take it for granted. Anymore.
I agree. I think that's a perfect segue into. I was gonna ask you two kind of speed round questions.
Okay.
One was, what do we need to do more of? I think you took care of that. So what's the thing that we need to quit doing? Like, what's the thing that needs to go?
Well, I used to say it's the mashed potato bar because I was anti-mashed potato bar. And then after the pandemic, it was like, oh my God, the mashed potato bar is so cool because it was like the ultimate comfort food. But I think that over creativity, like over the idea of what David said to me is that if you're an event organizer, David Allison said to me,
there's a lot
of Davids. Right now. David said that, he warns event organizers that it's not about the experience necessarily, it's about the belonging, and that you have to make people feel more belonging rather than just blow their mind with things that make them, hit the dopamine. You want to make it so the serotonin is working and you can connect with people and want to connect with people. So you have to make sure that you're moderating the experience, because we're experienced creators. We don't want to over experience.
Right. Yeah. I think that also goes into over engineering your agenda as well.
Oh, and too much. 100% overfilling your time. It's like bigger breaks, longer breaks, more ability to let people do what they want to do. Just chill.
Yeah, well, give people the opportunity to compare notes.
Yeah.
Because when they come out of a session and they say, "Oh, what did you think of this?"
Right.
They're probably going to say something completely different than the other person and go, "Oh, I didn't think of it that way."
Well, I do these Jeffersonian dinner parties. I think I told you about that.
Yeah.
And I do a whole process where people go around and I control the conversation, but I always end with a processing question. What did you think of this event? And give me your feedback. Because if you get people to give you your feedback right in the moment, you get real feedback. And then they love it too, because the dopamine levels go up because everyone's saying, "Oh my God, what a great experience." And they start organizations from that dinner that you had, and they want to meet with other people. It's just the art of connecting. And that's why I call it harnessing serendipity.
Yeah. Okay. One last question I just remembered that's completely unrelated. I heard you're involved in a Broadway play.
Yes, I'm involved in a Broadway play and other things. My father was a novelist.
Is the play, is it happening?
Yeah.
Or is it already out?
Oh, no, it's not out yet. My father wrote 50 novels. He wrote a book called The War of the Roses, which is a big movie with Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner. And he passed away. So my brothers and I are running the estate. And we've got a movie, The War of the Roses, is going to be coming out at some point. And we have a remake. And we have a Broadway play that's opening in London with Jason Alexander directing, hopefully in September or October this year.
Very exciting.
I'm learning that whole business, the whole movie and play business, and it's a different adventure.
Yeah. Well, congratulations and good luck.
Thank you.
Because it's not done yet. It sounds like.
No, it's not done yet, but we've had pandemics and we've had strikes and we've had everything in the way. So,
well, good. Okay.
Great.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that's it. Thank you very much.
You. Okay.
And travel home safe.
Thanks.
Thank you for making the time.
Fantastic.
Today.
This was great.
Yeah. I'm David T. Stevens. Thank you for watching this episode of Return on Wellness. Make sure you hit subscribe at the bottom there, please. And thank you. And our next episode will be coming up with Janice Cardinale, Event Minds Matter. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you so much for joining Return on Wellness. For help integrating these ideas, please scan the QR code. We sincerely hope you join us for our next episode of Return on Wellness.